There's a thing nobody tells you about a man dying slow under your own roof. He gets honest. Not brave honest, the kind they put in songs. The other kind. The kind where a stranger looks at the woman wiping the fever sweat off his neck and tells her the truest thing he has left, because he figures he won't have to live with what it costs him. I was there. I heard it. I wrote it down the way I write everything down, in the little tally book I keep on a nail by the door, because I have never once trusted my own memory to hold the things that matter, only the things that don't. This is the story of a deserter, an Apache woman the territory wanted dead, and an old fool with a half-broke ranch who learned, far too late in his life to do anything graceful about it, what the word home actually weighs when you put it in your two hands. You think you know how it ends. I thought I knew how it ended too. Stay with me. I'll tell it the way it happened, which is to say, badly and out of order, and with my hands shaking the whole time. I counted the rifle shots before I counted anything else. That's the kind of man I am. 3 close together, then a long nothing, then one more that came flat and final across the flat, and I stood on my porch in the blue dark with a tin cup going cold in my fist, and I said the number out loud. 4. As if the number would tell me something, as if the desert was a ledger and I could balance it. My name is Asa Whitlock. I was 61 years old that spring, and I ran 200 head of poor cattle on worse grass at the south foot of the Dragoons, in the part of the Arizona territory that the maps drew confident, and the living drew careful. My wife Marcy had been 3 years in the ground by then. My son was in Sacramento learning to be a man who wears a collar to work, which is a fine thing for a son to learn, and a lonesome thing for a father to know. So it was me and a deaf dog named Pilot and the wind, which never once stopped, the entire time I lived there, not for a single hour I can recall. The 4 shots came from down toward Sutler's Wash, maybe a mile and a half. I want to be plain about something. I did not go down there out of goodness. I want that on the record because the rest of this is going to make me sound better than I am, and I have spent my whole life around men who let a story improve them, and I never could stand a one of them. I went because of the dog. Pilot was old and stone-deaf, but he could feel a thing through his feet that I couldn't hear, and he had his nose pointed downwash and his ruined ears trying to lift, and he made a sound I'd only heard him make twice before, both times over something hurt and human. So I saddled the gray in the dark, which is a fool's errand for a man my age, and I rode down toward whatever the night had broken. I found the horse first, a cavalry bay, government brand on the hip, standing splay-legged over something with its head down and its sides heaving foam. Then I found the something. He was a young man. 23, 24, I'd learn later, though right then he was just a shape face down in the alkali with a dark spreading wet across the back of his left shoulder, and one hand still fixed around the stock of a carbine like he meant to take it with him wherever he was going. His uniform, and it was a uniform, blue wool gone the color of a bruise, was wrong in a way it took me a second to read in the starlight. The chevrons had been cut off the sleeve, not torn. Cut clean with a knife, the threads still hanging in their little frayed ranks where the stripes used to be. A man cuts his own stripes off when he has decided to stop being what the stripes said he was. "You alive?" I said, not a question. I don't ask questions of men who might be dead, it embarrasses us both. He turned his head maybe an inch and looked up at me with one eye, the other being pressed into the dirt, and he said, in a voice like a hinge that needs oil, "Don't bury me out here. Wind'll have me up by morning." "You're not dying," I told him, which I did not know, so quit auditioning for it. That's when I heard the second person breathing. She was in the lee of a creosote bush not 10 feet off, and she had been there the whole time, and I had not seen her, because she had not wanted me to, and a person who does not want to be seen in that country has the skill of a thing born to it. When I turned my head, she did not run. That told me more about her than anything she said in the weeks after. A woman alone in the dark with an old armed stranger, and she chose to be seen rather than leave the young man bleeding in the dirt while she got clear. She was Apache, Chiricahua, though I couldn't have told you the band on sight back then. I learned it the way you learn anything, slow and by paying for the wrong guesses. She wore a camp dress gone gray with travel, and a man's wool coat far too big for her, and she had a long knife at her belt that she made no move toward. And across her left forearm she carried a bundle wrapped in a trade blanket that I took for a child and that turned out, mercifully, to be everything the two of them owned in the world. A brass kettle, a sewing awl, a daguerreotype of a woman who was not her, and a Bible with the front quarter burned away. She said something to me in a language I didn't have. Then she looked at the young man and she looked back at me, and she did a thing with her empty hand, turned it palm up and flat, low, a gesture I came to understand meant something like he is mine to answer for, and I am asking. And then in English, careful as a person crossing a creek on wet stones, she said, "He cannot ride." "No," I agreed, "he surely can't." "You will leave him." And here is the first of the things I'm not proud of and won't pretty up. For about the length of one breath, I considered it. I'm a coward in the regular daily ways most men are, and I knew, even kneeling there in the dark, I knew that a deserter with a gunshot in him and an Apache woman off the reservation were two kinds of trouble that the territory hanged people for being near. I had a son in Sacramento. I had 200 poor cattle. I had a quiet life and 3 more graves worth of years to fill before I joined Marcy under the cottonwood, and not one part of any of that was improved by what lay in front of me in the dirt. I considered it for one breath. Then the young man, who I think was closer to gone than either of us knew, said the thing that decided me, and he didn't even say it to me. He said it to her. He got that one eye off the dirt and found her face in the dark, and he said, "You don't have to stay. Go on now. I mean it. There's no good reason for you to." And she said something back to him in Apache, short, and the shape of it in her mouth was so tired and so worn smooth from saying that I understood it was an argument they'd had before, many times, the way you understand the shape of a worn stair tread in the dark. I have thought about that exchange more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life. A man bleeding out in the desert, using what he believes are some of his last words not to beg for help, but to give a woman her freedom from him. You don't have to stay. I have known men who'd spend their last breath cursing God or calling for their mothers. I had never, before that night, known one to spend it trying to set somebody else loose. So I got down off the gray, with my knees announcing it to the whole county, and I said, "Nobody's leaving anybody. Help me get him up. We'll lose him if he keeps lying in this cold." She looked at me for a long second. Whatever she saw must have been close enough to what she needed, because she set down the bundle that was their whole life, and she came and put her shoulder under his good arm, and between the two of us and a great deal of profanity from me and silence from her, we got Wesley Tanner up across the gray and walked him a mile and a half home through the dark, while the wind, which never stopped, tried to take the smell of his blood and give it to everything that hunts at night. I want to tell you about the next 11 days the way they happened, but they didn't happen in a way that tells. They happened the way a fever happens in a hot, dark loop, the same hours coming around and around, the lamp and the basin and the rag, the lamp and the basin and the rag. The bullet had gone in below the shoulder blade and not come out. I am a rancher. I have pulled more things out of more animals than I'd care to count, and a man, in the parts that matter for keeping him alive against his own body's wishes, is not so different from a steer, which is a thing no preacher will tell you and every old vet quack in the territory knows. But I'd never have gotten it out without her. Her name, I'll write it the way she taught it to me, slow, 3 times, until I had it, was Sehoya. She would not tell me a family name. I came to understand later that this was not mistrust but grief, that the people the name belonged to were mostly under the ground at a place I won't write down here because the writing of it does nothing but salt a wound that the whole country ought to be ashamed it ever made. She had been at San Carlos, the reservation. She had left it. Those 2 facts in 1886 were enough to get a person shot on sight by men who'd call it law, and she carried them the way you'd carry an ember in your bare hand, close and careful, and knowing exactly what it would cost to drop. It was Sahoya who found the bullet. She had hands like a surgeon and a nerve I have never once possessed. She heated my skinning knife and the awl from her bundle in the lamp flame, and she talked to Wheeze the whole time in a low, steady river of Apache, not because he understood it, but because she told me afterward in her stone-stepping English. The voice is a rope. You give them the rope, they climb back on it. And he did. He climbed back on it. He came up out of the fever on the fourth day with the bullet in a tin cup on the windowsill where I'd put it. And the first thing he did was look around the room until he found her. And the second thing he did was start to cry, very quietly, like a man who has been holding it a long way and finally set it down. She didn't go to comfort him. She just let him see that she was there. I have come to believe that's a harder and a kinder thing. Here is what I learned about Wesley Tanner, in pieces over the long convalescence, told mostly at night when pain kept him honest and the lamp made the kitchen small and close. He was from Ohio. He had enlisted at 18 because the recruiting sergeant had described the West in a way that made it sound like a place where a poor man could become a different kind of man, which it is, though never the kind they advertise. He had been 3 years a soldier. He had been, by his own flat, unsparing account, a coward in some moments and brave in others, and he could no longer tell the two apart, which is the most honest thing I ever heard a soldier say about soldiering. And he had deserted because of a morning at a place I will, again, decline to name, where his unit had been part of an action against a band of Chiricahua who were trying to do nothing in this world but walk south to a country that would not hunt them. He had been told it was a battle. It had not been a battle. He had watched what it actually was, and he had stood in it with his carbine in his hands, and at some point, he could never say exactly which moment, he tried a dozen times and could never pin it. He had simply stopped being a thing that could keep doing it. He had found Sahoya afterward, or she had found him. The story changed depending on which of them was telling it, and I came to think they liked it that way, liked that the beginning of them was a thing neither could quite claim, the way the best parts of a life are. She had been the only one left moving where he'd been ordered to make sure nothing moved, and he had not been able to do it. And that single failure to obey, that one rifle lowered when it should have been raised, was the whole hinge his life now swung on. He had taken his stripes off with his own knife that night. He had been running ever since, and she with him, the two of them stitched together by an act of mercy that the United States Army had a specific word for, and the word was treason, and the penalty for it when they caught up to you was a rope. "You should have left me at the wash," he told me once in the dead middle of a night watching the ceiling. "You bought yourself a hanging taking us in, old man like you, no call to do that." "I'm not an old man," I said, which was a lie, "and I've been bored for 3 years, which is worse than hanged." He laughed. It hurt his shoulder and he laughed anyway. Then he was quiet for a while and he said, "Why though, really?" And I didn't have the 4-shots kind of answer, the kind you can count and balance. I said the only true thing I had, which was, "My wife would have taken you in. I'm just trying to be the man she thought I was a little while longer." He didn't say anything to that, but Sahoya, who I'd thought was asleep on the floor pallet by the stove, said, very soft into the dark, "That is the only reason there is." And none of us spoke again that night. The wind brought the soldiers on the 12th day. Of course it did. The wind brought everything, eventually. It was the one reliable mailman in that country. I was mending fence on the North Line when I saw the dust, and I knew it for cavalry by the way it held its shape, a tight controlled smear, not the loose wandering cloud of cattle or the single plume of a rider. 4 men, I made it, then a 5th. They were maybe an hour out, picking their slow, careful way along the wash, and an hour is not very long when you have 2 people in your house that the men in the dust have ridden a long way to kill. I should tell you I had a plan. I didn't have a plan. I had a half-broke ranch and a deaf dog and 61 years of being a man who avoided exactly this, and I rode for the house with my heart going like a bird against a window and not one single idea in my head about what I'd do when I got there. It was Sahoya who had the idea. By the time I'd flung off the gray and banged through the door, she was already moving, already had the floorboards up over the root cellar, the cramped dark space under the kitchen where I kept what little kept, and she was lowering Wheeze down into it on his bad arm and his white face, and she was stacking the kettle and the awl and the burned Bible, and the daguerreotype of the woman who was not her down beside him. And then she stood up out of the hole and looked at me, and did a thing I did not expect. She handed me her knife. "You found him alone," she said, fast, low, fitting the words together as quick as she could make them. "At the wash. He died. You buried him. There was no woman. I was never here." She pressed the knife handle into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "You do not know my name. You never learned it." "Sahoya." "You never learned it," she said again, fierce now, and her eyes were wet and her voice was not, and I understood what she was doing. She was doing the same thing he'd done in the dirt at the wash 12 days before. "You don't have to stay." She was trying to set us loose, me and him, both of us, by writing herself out of the story before the story could get us killed. She would go out the back. She would lead them off. She would be the only thing they caught. And from down in the dark of the root cellar, where he could hear every word through the gap in the floorboards, Wesley Tanner said the thing that this whole story is named for. He didn't shout it. He couldn't have. He was too weak to shout. He said it up through the floor in a whisper that I had to lean down to catch, and that I have never once stopped hearing in the 40 years since. "I'm already home," he said. "Sahoya, you hear me? There's no place you can send me back to. You're the place. I'm already home." She stood over that hole in my kitchen floor with her hand still warm pressed against mine around the knife. And outside the window the dust was 30 minutes out and closing. And I watched a woman who had survived the unsurvivable have to decide, in the space of about 4 seconds, whether to believe him. I'll tell you what she decided. But the dust is at 30 minutes, and my hands are shaking again just writing it, and some things you have to walk up on slow or they'll spook. So let me catch my breath, and pour out the cold coffee, and I'll tell you the rest the way it deserves to be told. Say continue and I'll write part 2, the soldiers at the door, the decision Sahoya makes over the hole in the floor, and the long heavy reckoning that follows once Asa lies to armed men for the first time in his life. Part 3 will carry it to its ending. Want me to keep the same narrator and tone exactly as is, or shift anything before I go on, you said. Part 2 10, 08 a.m. Claude responded. Part 2 orchestrated continuation of Western narrative with emotional depth and stylistic consistency. Orchestrated continuation of Western narrative with emotional depth and stylistic consistency. Part 2. She didn't go out the back. I want to put that down plain, the way I put down the 4 shots, because in the years since I have heard this story told wrong by people who weren't in my kitchen, and in their telling she runs. She leads the soldiers off into the rocks and dies brave on a hill somewhere so the white folks can weep about her over their suppers. That is a lie people tell because it lets them off something. She didn't run. She stood over that hole in my floor with her hand around mine around the knife. And she shut her eyes for the length of one breath, the same length of breath I'd spent at the wash deciding whether to leave them both to die, and when she opened them she had decided to believe him. She let go of the knife. She left it in my hand. And then she got down into the hole in the floor with Wesley Tanner, into the close black dirt-smelling dark, and she pulled the trade blanket over the 2 of them. And the last thing I saw before I fit the boards back down was her arm going across his chest, settling there, the way you'd settle a hand over something to keep it from being taken. "Be still," I said to the floor. "Whatever you hear up here, be still as the grave and twice as quiet." A bad choice of words. I knew it the second it was out. From under the boards I heard Wheeze make a sound that was half a laugh and half the other thing, and then nothing, and the nothing was worse. I had about 20 minutes. I spent them the way a frightened man spends time, which is to say badly and all at once. I scrubbed the blood rag and the basin and flung the water out the door across the dust where it'd dry to nothing in 10 minutes. I kicked the floor pallet apart and threw the bedding up in the loft. I took the second tin cup off the windowsill, the one with the bullet still in it, and I stood there a stupid frozen second, not knowing what to do with a bullet I'd pulled out of a man who wasn't supposed to exist. And finally I did the only thing I could think of, which was swallow my pride and the evidence both. I walked out to the cottonwood where Marcy was buried, and I pushed that bullet down into the soft, turned earth at the foot of her stone with my thumb, deep as it would go, and I patted it flat. I told her I was sorry to be using her like a hiding place. I told her I thought she'd understand. The wind took the words off sideways the way it took everything, and I went back to wait on the porch with her knife shoved down the back of my belt under my coat, and my heart going like a trapped bird, and Pilot pressed warm and trembling against my leg, feeling through his feet what his ruined ears couldn't tell him was coming. They came in slow and spread out, which is how men come who have done this before. 5 of them. A sergeant out front on a good sorrel, 3 troopers strung loose behind, and riding a little apart, the way a man rides who is not quite of the group he travels with, a civilian scout. An old half-Apache, half-Mexican tracker with a face like a dropped saddle and eyes that went over my place once fast, and saw, I was certain, every single thing I had spent 20 minutes trying to hide. The sergeant was named Mott. I learned that because he told me, friendly as a Sunday, which is its own kind of warning. He had a soft round face that didn't fit the rest of him and a way of smiling while his eyes did arithmetic. He pulled up in my yard and looked at my poor cattle and my leaning barn and my dead wife's flower bed gone to weed, and he took it all in like a man reading a bill, and he said, "Evening. You'd be the owner here." "A sow Whitlock," I said, "such as it is." "Sergeant Mott, 4th Cavalry out of Bowie." He smiled the soft smile. "We're hunting a deserter. White man, young, took a wound 4 or 5 days back over east of here. Might be traveling with a squaw off San Carlos." He watched my face when he said squaw, watched it the way the scout watched my barn. You see anything like that come through? And there it was, the first lie I ever told to an armed man, and I have to tell you the truth about it, which is that it came out of me smooth as cream, and I hated myself for how easy it was. "I found a man," I said. I felt the whole yard go still. The sergeant's smile didn't change, but something behind it did, and the scout's head came around slow, and under my feet, under the floorboards, I knew Sahoya and Weeze had heard me through the open door, and I knew what those 3 words must have done to the 2 of them in the dark. "Did you?" said Mott, very soft. "Down at Sutler's Wash 4 or 5 days back, like you say." I made myself slow down, made myself be a tired old rancher telling a tedious true thing because the closest lie to the truth is the one that holds. "Heard shooting in the night. Went down come morning. Found a young fella, blue uniform, shot through the back. Government horse standing over him, all done in." All true. Every word so far was true, and I'd learned in 20 minutes of terror what it took some men a lifetime not to learn, that the most dangerous lie is the one you build entirely out of true things and then finish with a single false brick at the very top. He was dead when I got there. Been dead some hours, I judge. Cold. The false brick. "I buried him," I said. "Out past the cottonwood. Didn't seem Christian to leave him for the wind." Mott looked at me a long moment. "Any stripes on him?" "Cut off," I said. "Sleeve was cut where they'd been. I noticed it, thought it was queer." That landed. I saw it land. It was a true detail, a thing only a man who'd really seen the body would know to say, and it bought me something. I watched it buy me something in Mott's soft face. "Squaw with him," he said. "No woman," I said. "Just him and the horse." I kept the horse. Government brand, but a dead horse is no good to the government, and a live one's some good to me, and I figured the army owed me the digging. I let a little bite into it, a little bitter old man grievance, because nothing makes a lie sound true like a man complaining about not being paid for it. The scout had gotten down off his horse. Nobody told him to. He walked over toward the cottonwood, slow, not looking at me at all, looking at the ground, reading it the way I read shot counts. And I understood with a cold drop in my belly that I had told the one lie I could not back up, because I had not buried a man past the cottonwood. There was no grave. There was a flat patch of nothing and a tracker walking straight toward the spot where I'd just sworn the earth held a body. I have never in my life thought as fast as I thought in the next 10 seconds, and the thought that came was not clever. It was just true. So I went with true. "He's not where the diggings are," I said, loud enough to stop the scout, and I made my voice crack a little, which God help me wasn't hard. "I couldn't, the ground's hard as iron out there, you try it. I got down maybe 2 feet and I couldn't go further, old back like mine. So I put rock over him. Cairn, out in the wash itself where he fell. Couldn't move him far neither, he'd stiffened. I let my voice do the thing a grieving, honest man's voice does. You want to go look at a 4-day-old grave in this heat, Sergeant. I'll point you the way, but I'll tell you it won't be a thing you thank me for." The scout stopped. He turned around and looked at me, and for the first and only time his drop saddle face showed me something, and the something was not suspicion. It was a kind of weary recognition, the look of one man who has buried bodies in hard ground seeing another man who claims to have done the same. He said something to Mott in Spanish, low. I caught maybe a third of it. I caught Viejo and I caught Pedras, old man, and Stones. And I caught the shrug in his shoulders that said the ground out here won't take a spade. It's true. I believe this part at least. Mott chewed it. I watched him chew it. And here is the thing I'll never know that I've turned over 40 years. Whether he believed me, or whether he half believed me and was tired, or whether. And this is the possibility I can't put down and can't pick up. Whether Sergeant Mott was a man who had also stood in something east of here that he'd been told was a battle, and was looking for a reason, any reason, to ride on and let one deserter stay buried under his stones. I'll never know. You don't get to know things like that. You get the surface of a man and the wind takes the rest. "We'll want to see the cairn," Mott said. "Then we'll ride out at first light," I said, "because I'm not finding a wash by lantern with my eyes, and I doubt you'll do better. You're welcome to my barn and my well. I'd offer the house, but it's just the one room and I snore like a sawmill." A joke. A small, flat ranchman's joke, dropped into the middle of the most frightened minute of my life, because I had learned that too, in 20 minutes, that men relax around a man who can still make a poor joke, because dangerous men don't make jokes, they're too busy. Mott almost smiled, the real kind, for half a second. "Sawmill, huh?" He looked at his troopers who were tired, who had been hunting a dead man for 5 days and wanted nothing on this earth but to get down off their horses. He looked at the sky going purple over the dragoons. "Barn'll do," he said. And they got down, and I had bought one night. I cannot tell you what it cost to fix supper for 5 soldiers over the heads of the 2 people they'd ride to a rope. I made it count, though. I made it a great show, banged the pots, talked too much, drew them out about Bowie and about home, learned that the youngest trooper was a Tennessee boy of 19 named Prout who missed his mother and didn't try to hide it, learned that Mott had a wife in Tucson and a daughter he'd seen 4 times. I did it on purpose, all of it, and I am not proud of the purpose, because the purpose was this. A man will not look for a body in your floor if you have spent the evening becoming, in his mind, just a lonely old fool who's glad of the company. I made myself harmless. I made myself a thing they pitied a little. Pity is a kind of blindness, and I used it like a tool, and the using of it sat on me like a stone, because Prout the Tennessee boy showed me a tintype of his mother, and I told him she had a kind face, and I meant it. And the whole time I meant it, I was lying to him with my entire body. They turned in early, tired men. I sat up. I always sit up. It's the only honest hour. And somewhere past midnight, when the barn was full of the sound of soldiers sleeping, I got down on my kitchen floor with a candle, and I put my mouth to the gap in the boards, and I told them, the 2 of them down in the dark where they'd been folded together silent for 9 hours, what was happening. "They go look for the grave at first light," I breathed. "There isn't one. When they don't find it," I stopped. I didn't have the end of that sentence. There was no good end of that sentence. It was Wees who answered, and his voice came up through the floor, changed, stronger. The way a man's voice gets when he has stopped being afraid because he has finished deciding something, which is a different thing from being brave and is in some ways the opposite of it. Then I walk out, he said. At first light. Before they do. I walk out into the yard with my hands up and I'm the deserter, and I died slow of my wound after you found me, and you've been afraid to say so because harboring's a hanging too. I confirm your whole story. Man can't argue with a confession. A pause. She stays in the floor, you give them me, they stop looking. They got what they came 5 days for. They don't tear up the house of a man who handed them their deserter. It was a good plan. It was a sound plan. It would, very probably, work. It would save Sehoya and it would save me and it would cost exactly one thing, and the one thing was Wesley Tanner's neck. And from the dark beside him I heard Sehoya say, in English, low and absolutely level, "No." Sehoya. No. And then a long thing in Apache, fast, fierce, the worn stair-tread sound of an argument they'd had before, but underneath it something new and hard. I didn't have the words. I didn't need them. I have heard that tone come out of human beings in 2 languages I do understand, and it always means the same thing. It means you do not get to decide to die for me. That is not yours to give. I sat back on my heels on the cold floor with the candle guttering, and I listened to 2 people I'd known 11 days argue in the pitch dark, under the feet of the men who'd come to kill them, about which of them got to be the one to be killed. Each of them fighting hard, fighting with everything, for the right to be the sacrifice. You don't have to stay, he'd said in the wash. I'm already home, he'd said over the hole in the floor. And now here it was come round full circle. Each of them trying, one more time, to set the other one loose, and neither one of them willing to be set. I have sat at the deathbeds of 3 people I loved. I have buried a wife. I had never, until that night on my kitchen floor, understood what love actually is, underneath all the songs about it. It is not the wanting. The wanting is easy. Any fool can want. It's the part where you'd rather take the rope yourself than watch it go around the other one's neck, and the other one would rather die than let you. It's 2 people in a hole in the dark, each trying to give the other a future at the price of themselves, and neither one able to stand being the one who's given to. That's the whole of it. That's the article. Everything else is decoration. I let them argue until they'd worn it down to silence. And then I put my mouth to the gap, and I said the thing that I had been turning over while they fought. The thing that I am still not sure was wisdom, or just an old man's refusal to let either of 2 young people I'd come to love be the one to die in my yard. Nobody walks out at first light, I said, because at first light there won't be a grave to find, but there won't be us either. We're not here when they wake, all 3 of us, gone in the dark north into the rocks, and they wake to an empty house and a cold stove and an old fool who finally lost his nerve and ran off rather than show them a grave that was never dug. I felt the shape of it as I said it, felt where it was thin. It's 3 days hard to the line. We's can't ride 3 days hard. We's can ride 3 days hard, said We's. We's is a liar, I said, and I've gotten good at telling, but it's the only hand we've got, so we'll play it badly and hope they're worse. I almost laughed. I didn't. Get what sleep you can. We move at the dead hour before the Tennessee boy wakes to make his coffee. There was a silence under the floor. Then Sehoya said, soft, the way she'd said it 11 days back into the dark of that first night, "That is the only reason there is," she said. "Why, really?" Throwing my own son's worth of a question back at me. Why would an old man burn down his whole safe life, his ranch, his name, his son's good standing, the quiet grave years left to him under the cottonwood beside his wife, to run north into the rocks with 2 strangers the country had condemned? And this time I had a better answer than I'd had at the wash. Not a clever one, a true one, which is the only kind worth the breath. "Because I left you once already," I said to the floor. "For one breath down at the wash, I thought about riding home and leaving the both of you to the dark. I've had 11 days to live with the man who thought that. I find I can't do it twice." Nobody said anything. The candle went out on its own, the way they do, with a little tired sound like a held breath let go. And in the dark of my own kitchen I sat with my back against the leg of the table where my wife and I had eaten 10,000 suppers, and I waited for the dead hour, and I listened to 5 soldiers sleeping in my barn and 2 condemned people breathing in my floor, and I thought, Marcy, look what you made me. Look what was in here the whole time, under the boards, and neither of us ever knew. We moved at the dead hour. Getting Wheeze up out of the floor was its own small war, fought in whispers, his bad arm useless and his face gone the color of the candle tallow, and the sweat starting on him before we'd even got him standing, which I did not like, which told me the wound was turning, which I did not let myself think about because there was nothing to be done about it but go. Sehoya had the gray and my second horse, an ugly, steady, mule-headed mare named Dorcas who I'd have trusted with my life and shortly would, saddled and wrapped in rag against the jingle. She'd done it silent as smoke not 30 feet from the open barn. The woman could move through the world without disturbing it in a way I have never seen before or since. I left the door of the house standing open, on purpose. A man who runs in a panic doesn't shut his door. And on the table, where Mott would find it, I left a thing I'd written by the dead coal glow with my hands not quite steady. A note in my own hand that said the deserter had died in the night of his wound after all, and that I had buried him out in the wash under stones the way I'd said, and that I'd run because I was an old man afraid of a harboring rope and couldn't bear the questions, and that the cattle were the army's now, payment for the trouble, and God keep them. Every word of it a lie. Every word of it built to send 5 tired men east to the wash to spend a day hunting a cairn that wasn't there while we went north. It would buy us a day, maybe a day. I left it weighted under the tintype of Prout's mother that the Tennessee boy had set on my table at supper and forgotten, and I told myself I'd find a way to get it back to him, which was a lie too, the kind you tell yourself, the worst kind. We went out into the dark north, into the rocks. 3 people and 2 horses and a deaf dog who would not be left, with 3 days hard country in front of us, and a turning wound, and a sergeant who would wake in 2 hours to an open door and a cold stove, and a note full of lies. I looked back once from the first rise, at the shape of my home going small and black against the graying east, the leaning barn, the cottonwood, the stone underneath it where I'd hidden a bullet in my wife's grave, and where I would now, it was plain, never lie down beside her the way I'd always figured I would. Sehoya brought Dorcas up beside me. She didn't say anything. She just looked back at the house with me for a moment, the 2 of us, and then she looked at me, and she did the thing with her hand, palm up, flat, low, that she'd done that first night in the dirt. I am asking. I didn't know what she was asking. I shook my head a little. I don't understand. And she said in her careful creek-crossing English, looking at the home I was leaving in the dirt behind me, you don't have to stay with us. You take them east, you come back, you are an old man who ran one night and thought better. They forgive that. You have a son. Setting me loose. One more time. The both of them to the very end, trying to hand everyone around them a way out of the fire. I looked at her. The east was going pink behind my dying ranch. Somewhere south of us a sergeant slept who I'd lied to with my whole body, and beside me a young man swayed on my gray horse with a wound going bad in him, and ahead of us was 3 days of rock, and very likely the end of all of us. Sehoya, I said, and I borrowed the line. I knew I was borrowing it. I think she knew too. I think that's why I said it. I'm already home. She looked at me a long moment. The pink came up behind us and lit the side of her face, and I saw, for the first time in 11 days, the only time, I saw her smile. Then we turned the horses north and rode into the rocks, and behind us the sun came up on an empty house with the door standing open, and a note full of lies on the table, and a tally book left behind on its nail by that door, which is the only reason I can't tell you the next part exactly right. Say continue for part 3, the run north through the rocks, We's turning wound, what the soldiers do when they find the open door, and the ending. I'll bring it home, you said. Part 3, part 310, 29 a.m. Claude responded. Part 3, Orchestrated Emotional Narrative Conclusion with Stylistic Consistency. Orchestrated Emotional Narrative Conclusion with Stylistic Consistency. Part 3. I have to tell you the next part different, and I'll tell you why. I left my tally book on its nail by the door. 40 years of counting shots, head of cattle, days of rain, the small balanced ledger of a small balanced life. And I left it hanging there in the dark when we ran, because a man fleeing for his life doesn't stop to take down the thing that proves how ordinary his life was up till then. So everything I've told you so far, I had it down in numbers and could check myself against the page. 4 shots. 11 days. 12 days the soldiers came. 5 of them. I trust the numbers more than I trust me. But from the rise where I looked back at my home going small, I had no book anymore. So this last part I tell you out of nothing but the inside of my own head, which I have already warned you I don't trust, and which has had 40 years to soften the hard parts and sharpen the wrong ones. Take it the way you take an old man pointing at a far ridge and saying it happened about there. About there. As near as I can put my finger on it. About there. The first day north was the good day, which is a terrible thing to say about a day, but it was. We's rode. He swayed and he sweated, and twice I had to ride knee with him to keep him in the saddle when the country tilted, but he rode, and the wound held, and we made better time than I dared hope through the broken red rock above the wash. Sehoya led. She knew that country the way I knew my own kitchen in the dark, knew where the water was, knew which draws would hide us and which would funnel us out into the open like cattle into a chute. She'd lived in it. She'd been hunted across it before, and the knowing of it was a thing that had been bought at a price I didn't ask about and she didn't offer. We didn't talk much. You don't, running. But in the long flat afternoon, while we dozed white-faced in the saddle and Dorcas the mare picked her own steady way, Sehoya rode up beside me and told me a thing I hadn't asked. She told me the woman in the daguerreotype, the one I'd taken for her, that first night, and that wasn't her, was her sister's daughter's teacher, a white missionary woman from the agency school who had hidden 4 Chiricahua children under a church floor when the soldiers came through, and had been turned out of the territory for it, and had given Sehoya the little brass-framed picture of herself the day she left, and said, "So someone remembers there was one of us who tried." Sehoya had carried it ever since. Through everything. The picture of a stranger kept because the stranger had once, at cost, refused to look away. I understood then why she'd let me see her, that first night, instead of vanishing into the dark while we's bled. She'd been shown, once, what it looked like when somebody chose not to leave. And she'd decided, a long way back and a long way up the line of her grief, that she would be that for somebody too, no matter what it cost, because somebody had been it for her. That's a thing about kindness I didn't know before that ride and have never forgotten since. It doesn't move in a straight line, and it doesn't come back to the one who spent it. It goes sideways. It skips. A missionary woman saves 4 children under a floor, and a generation later, an Apache woman won't leave a wounded deserter in a wash, and an old fool burns his life down to run them both north, and not one link in that chain ever gets paid back by the one it gave to. It just keeps going sideways, the way the wind in that country always went sideways, taking everything somewhere other than where you aimed it. The second day was the bad day. The wound turned hard in the night. By the gray of morning, Wees was burning, really burning, the way he'd burned that first week before the bullet came out. And there was no bullet to come out this time, just the slow red infection working its way deeper. And Sehoya cut the shirt off him in the cold dawn and looked at it and didn't say anything, and her not saying anything told me everything. She did what she could. She had her all and a little of what she'd gathered along the way. I don't know all the plants, I never learned them, I wish to God I had, and she packed it, and she sang the low river of Apache over him that was the rope she gave a man to climb. But he was not climbing this time. He was sliding. And about midday, in the bottom of a shaded draw where we'd stopped because he couldn't go on, Wesley Tanner came up clear out of the fever for a little while the way the dying sometimes do, that cruel false dawn, and he looked at the 2 of us bent over him and he started again. the only argument he had left. "Leave me," he said. He was smiling. That was the worst of it, he was smiling. "Come on now, you both know it. I'm slowing you down to a crawl, and these soldiers'll have figured the wash for a lie by now and turned north, and two of you on 2 horses can make the line in a day if you're not dragging a dead man. Leave me the carbine and a canteen and go. I'll buy you the day." He found Sehoya's hand. "I told you back at the wash, you don't have to stay. I keep telling you and you keep not listening, woman. You are the stubbornest." "You said you were home," she said. It stopped him. "At the floor," she said. "You said you are the place, I am already home, you said it." Her English broke and reached and held. "A person does not leave his home to die in a draw so the home can keep walking. That is not, there is no sense. If I am your home, then your home does not put you down in the rocks and go on without you. Your home stays. That is what the word means. You taught me the word. Now I am teaching it back to you." I had to look away. I am not ashamed to tell you, I walked a little way up the draw and stood with my hand on Dorcas's warm neck and looked at the rock and let them have it without me. Because there are moments a third person has no business inside of, and that was one, and I'd been inside enough of theirs already to last me my life. When I came back, he'd stopped arguing. Not because she'd won, though she had, but because he didn't have the strength left to make the case. He just lay in the shade with his head in her lap and her hand moving slow over his hair, and his eyes found me, and he said, in the hinge voice from the very first night, "Asa, you count things. I've watched you. You count everything." "It's a poor habit," I said. "Count me something," he said. "I want to hear a number that isn't the soldiers and isn't the days left." His eyes were going far. "Count me something good." So I sat down in the dirt of the draw beside the two of them, and I counted him something good. I counted the 11 days he'd lived in my kitchen, and the 4 times his fever broke and came back and broke for good, and the 1 bullet in a tin cup, and the woman who'd held him in a hole in my floor for 9 hours without making a sound. I counted the 3 of us and the 2 horses, and the 1 deaf dog who'd followed us north and lay, now panting in the shade with his chin on the boy's boot. I counted small true things the way I'd counted them my whole life, except for the first time in my life I understood what the counting had been for, not to balance a ledger, never that, the ledger never balanced and was never going to, but just to say this was here. This happened. I was a witness to it and I wrote it down. That's all any of it was ever for. To be the one who saw and didn't look away and kept the account. He died in the late afternoon with the light coming gold down the draw and Sehoya's hand in his hair and my voice still going soft over the small good numbers. And I don't know which number I was on when he went, and I've decided I don't want to. Some counts you let stay open. We buried him in the draw. Real this time, no lie in it, no story, just 2 people in the hard ground and a long time with the only spade we had, which was Sehoya's hands and mine, and the awl in a flat rock, working until the dark came down. We laid him deep enough that the wind would never have him, the way he'd asked of me the very first thing in the dirt at the wash. "Don't bury me out here. Wind'll have me up by morning." It hadn't. It wouldn't. I made sure of it. It was the one promise out of all of them that was mine to keep, and I kept it. Sehoya put the burned Bible in with him, the front quarter gone to the same fire that had taken most of her world, and I asked her with my eyes was she sure, and she said it wasn't hers to keep. It had come to her from him along the way and it should go where he went. But she kept the daguerreotype of the missionary woman who tried. That one stayed with her. So someone remembers there was one of us who tried. There were 2 of them now in that little brass frame in her head, if not on the glass, the woman and the boy in the ground. Maybe 3. I never asked if she counted me. I didn't think I'd earned it. I'd thought about leaving them in a wash once for 1 breath, and I have never been able to fully forgive that breath, and I don't think a man should. We didn't make the line the next day. We made it the day after, the 4th day out, the 2 of us and the 2 horses and the dog, down out of the rocks at last to the thin scratched mark in the dust that somebody in a faraway office had decided was the difference between a country that would hunt her and a country that would not. It's a strange thing, a border. It is the most powerful thing in the world, and it is nothing at all. a line a man drew with a pen who never saw the dirt it crossed. We stepped over it in the morning, and on one side of the step, the United States Army could hang her, and on the other side it could not. And the dirt was exactly the same dirt. And the wind crossed back and forth over the line both ways without ever once asking leave. I'll tell you the truth. I don't know if the soldiers ever turned north. I don't know if Mott read my note of lies and rode east to a wash with no grave in it and cursed me, or if he read it and knew it for a lie and let us go anyway, a man tired of hunting, a man with a daughter in Tucson he'd seen 4 times. I never found out. You don't get to find out. I left a tally book on a nail, and a story I'll never know the end of, and I have made my peace with the not knowing the way you make peace with the wind badly, and over a long time, and never completely. At the line, Sehoya tried one last time. I should have known she would. They both always did, right to the end, the two of them, handing out exits like a man handing out coats at the door. Here, take this one. You don't have to come where I'm going. She stood with Dorcas's lead in her hand on the far side of that nothing line, and she looked back at me on the near side and she said, "Here is where you go home, Asa." "I told you," I said, "I'm—" "No," she stopped me gentle, the way you stop a child saying a thing it's repeated too often to mean. "That was his word. You borrowed it. It was kind, but it was his." She looked south, back the way we'd come, back toward the rocks and the draw and a leaning barn and a cottonwood with a stone under it. "You have a home. It is back there, a real one with your wife in the ground beside the place you mean to lie. You came north so I would not be alone in the dark, and I am across the line now, and I will not be hunted here, and you have done the thing the missionary woman did, the thing the boy did. You did not look away. It is finished. You did it. Now you go home, old man, and you lie down someday next to your Marcy, and that is not a sad ending, that is the right ending, and I will not let you give it up to keep an old woman company in a country that is not yours." She was right. I knew she was right. Everything I had was south of that line, the graves I belonged among, the son in Sacramento who'd need to be told his father was alive, the small ordinary remainder of a small ordinary life that a man doesn't get to throw away just because for 11 days and 4 hard nights it had finally meant something. But I want to tell you what I'd learned, because it's the whole of what I learned, the article, the thing under all the songs. I'd learned that you don't have to stay and I'm already home are not 2 different things people say. They're the same thing, said from the 2 ends. One is the love that tries to set you free because it can't bear to cost you anything. The other is the love that won't be set free because it has decided that you are the cost it wants to pay. And a life, a real one, not the kind in the ballads, is just people standing at borders and bedsides and holes in the floor, saying the first one to each other over and over, and now and then, if they're very lucky, once or twice before the end, hearing the second one said back. I didn't go back, not that day. I rode south the next morning, alone but for the dog, with Dorcas left behind because Sehoya would need 2 horses where she was going and I would need only the gray to carry one tired old man home. And I have spent 40 years telling people I went home, and lying down beside Marcy is still, the doctor tells me, a thing I'll be doing soon enough, and the cottonwood's still there, and the stone, and somewhere down at its foot there's a bullet I pushed into the dirt with my thumb the night I learned to lie. But here's the thing I've never told. Here's the thing I'm telling you now at the end, because I'm old and the count's nearly closed, and there's no one left it can hurt. I didn't ride straight south.